I knew Joshua Riley was trouble from day one. Appointed VP of Digital Operations thanks to his father's influence, he arrived with no real experience and an inflated sense of expertise. When I explained our hybrid data architecture, he just said, "Cool. But like fully cloud though." That's when I realized he didn't understand the systems he was about to dismantle. He called it innovation. I watched it as sabotage. He scrapped our detailed compliance logging system, replacing it with a flashy dashboard that showed summaries instead of audit-ready records. Transaction logs were reduced to daily totals, access trails erased, raw data discarded, all in the name of efficiency. I didn't argue. I documented everything. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. After years of quietly preserving records, timestamps, hash-verified backups, encrypted archives, I had a parallel system no one knew about. I named folders after recipes to hide them. Lemon chicken marinade variations held proof of unauthorized database queries. Garden soil pH testing stored ignored compliance warnings. When vendor payments stopped matching procurement logs, I flagged it. Joshua shut it down in an hour. Granular tracking creates unnecessary data bloat. Another red flag. Another encrypted backup. Then he killed manual security audits, claiming AI could do it better. It couldn't. The tool didn't preserve raw logs, meaning we'd have nothing to show regulators. I said so. He accused me of resisting progress. The truth was clear. Joshua wasn't just incompetent. He was erasing accountability, building a facade of compliance that would collapse under scrutiny. And I was silently archiving every step of the way. My encrypted drive filled with evidence. GDPR violations, deleted audit trails, and records of ignored warnings, all hidden under innocuous labels. I kept it all secret because exposing it would implicate others. I was the only one who knew where the bodies were buried, the only one who could prove what really happened if history got rewritten. Then came a wake-up call. A European data processor asked for proof we met data protection standards. Simple request, but we couldn't fulfill it. Joshua's dashboard showed security existed, but not the details needed to prove compliance. The real logs had been scrapped for summaries. I spent 3 days reconstructing a proper report from hidden backups, access logs, encryption proofs, retention policies, and submitted it with a careful explanation. The next morning, Joshua called me in. "You made it sound like our systems are inadequate," he said, frustrated. "They are inadequate for compliance," I replied. "Auditors need evidence, not dashboards." "From now on," he snapped, "all external compliance messages go through me." That's when I knew I was in danger. He wasn't fixing problems, he was silencing the person pointing them out. I didn't argue. I just created a new backup documenting that conversation and labeled it "Coffee Shop Recommendations Downtown Area." That night I moved everything to my personal laptop, air-gapped, never connected to company networks. I made 2 encrypted copies. One in a safe deposit box, the other with my sister under strict instructions. Something happened to me, the truth would still surface. Eleanor's fate flashed through my mind. Escorted out, silenced, erased. I wouldn't let that happen to me. Then the FTC announced a routine audit. Panic erupted. Legal scrambled. Operations spun. And Joshua? He was terrified. His sleek dashboard couldn't answer real regulatory questions. He called an emergency meeting. "We need the standard audit docs. Now." "The detailed logs are gone," I said. "Your dashboard replaced them." His face turned red. "Recreate them from the dashboard data. It doesn't have transaction-level detail. That's what you called data bloat." Silence. His team froze. "So you're telling me," he said slowly, "we can't provide the FTC with compliance documentation? It doesn't exist. Your system was designed to hide detail, not preserve it. Then why didn't you stop me?" I looked him in the eye. "I documented every warning. They're in the system. You dismissed them all." His anger shifted to calculation. "Stay behind." After everyone left, he leaned in. "How bad is this?" "Serious. We can show we had controls but not prove they worked. Auditors will want specifics. What can you salvage? A time machine would help. Otherwise, maybe 60%. Enough for good faith, not enough to cover the gaps." Do it. Full priority. As I stood to leave, he added, and Callista? This stays between us. No one needs to panic. I walked out. Back at my desk, I pulled up my archive, not to save Joshua, but to protect the 200 employees who didn't deserve to lose their jobs over his mess. I created a new folder, FTC Audit Preparation Notes. Inside, every email, memo, and change log proving I'd tried to stop this. Difference. Pure and simple. I spent the week rebuilding fragments into usable trails. Joshua hovered constantly, stressed, finally realizing the damage he'd done. I didn't gloat. Just cleaned up another mess. Then I saw it, strange access patterns in the logs. Odd hours. 3 a.m. weekends. Administrative credentials pulling financial data. Vendor payments, executive pay, acquisition details. I checked the user ID. Joshua Riley. My stomach dropped. This wasn't incompetence. It was intentional. I discovered Joshua was accessing sensitive financial data late at night. Vendor payments, executive compensation, acquisition details, all outside legitimate business needs. I had documented every unauthorized access, every suspicious export, all preserved with timestamps and cryptographic verification. I created a new folder labeled Emergency Contact Phone Numbers, and filled it with the logs of his activity, cross-referenced with company events and stock movements. The pattern was clear. The CEO's son was using his access for something that violated policy, and likely the law. That night I activated my dead man's switch. If anything happened to me, the encryption keys would automatically go to my attorney, an investigative journalist, and the FTC. 2 weeks before the audit, Joshua confronted me in his office, furious. Someone's been digging through old logs, he said. Specifically looking at my activity. I've been reconstructing audit trails for the FTC, I replied calmly. He accused me of running unauthorized systems, calling it theft. He claimed my scope had changed and I should have decommissioned the backups. It was obvious, he was building a case to make me the scapegoat when the audit exposed the compliance gaps he created. I understand your concerns, I said. I'll prepare a report on the backup systems for review. Don't bother, he snapped. You're suspended. Security will escort you out. Guards appeared. I gathered my things, phone, keys, water bottle, and walked out without protest. Coworkers stared. Whispers followed. By the time I reached my car, the story was already twisting. She stole data. She was fired for hacking. I drove to a coffee shop, hands shaking. It had happened. I'd been purged. But Joshua didn't know the truth. I'd been ready for this. Every violation, every lie, every move he made was archived. Secure, encrypted, untouchable. I pulled out my personal phone and sent 3 messages. To my attorney, open the envelope. To my sister, trigger the switch. To an FTC investigator I knew, subject, urgent regulatory concerns regarding Vanguard Solutions message. I've just been terminated after raising compliance concerns. I have extensive documentation of system changes relevant to your audit. I'm available to discuss. Professional. Factual. A smoke alarm in an executive's inbox. I started the car and drove home. Not panicked. Not angry. Just calm, the weight finally off my shoulders. They wanted me gone? Fine. Now they'd learn what it meant to lose the one person who'd been holding their crumbling infrastructure together. And they'd find out that the quiet woman they dismissed had been documenting everything. At home, I opened my laptop and began organizing the evidence. Not for revenge but clarity. A timeline of every warning ignored, every system destroyed, every gap created. All backed by irrefutable proof. The story wrote itself. The FTC investigator called the next morning. Ms. Rhodes, thanks for reaching out. You mentioned documentation. Yes. Records of compliance changes over the past 9 months. Deprecated logs, deleted security trails, unauthorized access. All time-stamped, cryptographically verified. You were terminated yesterday? Escorted out after raising concerns about missing audit documentation. And this evidence, was it part of your official duties? I maintained backups for business continuity and compliance. Standard practice. They captured exactly how the gaps were created. There was a long pause. Papers shuffled. We need to follow proper procedures, whistleblower protections, chain of custody, but I need you to know, your message got attention. I understand. I just wanted them to know the documentation exists, before they walk in expecting to find it, and realize it doesn't. I scheduled the meeting with Agent Carr for 2 days later. Hanging up, I felt something unfamiliar. Relief. For 9 years, I'd carried the weight of other people's decisions, covering for incompetence, fixing problems in silence. Now it wasn't my burden anymore. Let them scramble. Let Joshua explain why he dismantled critical systems. I was done protecting those who wouldn't protect themselves. At the FTC office, I met with Agent Carr and her colleague Agent Ryan Cole. I brought my encrypted drives and personal laptop. Everything safely isolated from Vanguard's reach. Agent Carr began by outlining my rights. You're voluntarily providing information. You can have an attorney present. I understand, I said. I'll proceed without counsel for now. The recording started. She asked about my role. I explained. 9 years as system architect responsible for compliance infrastructure, audit trails and data integrity. As the company grew, so did the complexity and the cracks. When did you first see issues? She asked. 18 months ago. Small things, skipped reviews, shortened approvals. I started keeping detailed backups as a precaution. And what changed? Joshua Riley became VP of Digital Operations. He called our compliance systems inefficient, then gutted them. Removed detailed logs. Replaced security monitoring with flashy dashboards that couldn't prove compliance. Called it innovation. I called it a disaster waiting to happen. I showed them the evidence. Before and after snapshots of the logging systems, gaps in audit trails, ignored warnings. All time-stamped, hash-verified, unaltered. Agent Cole studied the screen. These logs show the original data was deleted in May? Deprecated officially. But yes, effectively gone. I preserved it because decommissioning those backups would have left us defenseless in an audit. And you didn't comply with his order to wipe them? No. Because that would have meant failing compliance. Which is exactly what they're about to face. I walked them through vendor discrepancies, missing access logs, unauthorized exceptions, every red flag I'd raised and been overruled on. Then came the bigger issue. This gets complicated, I said. 6 months ago, I noticed unusual admin activity, late-night access to financial data, vendor payments, executive comp, acquisition details. All under Joshua Riley's credentials. Agent Carr leaned in. Any idea why? The timing was suspicious, often before major announcements. No operational reason for him to pull that data. I didn't speculate, just documented it. They were stunned. You kept all this? With verification. Every file time-stamped and cryptographically signed. I can prove when it existed and that it hasn't been altered. Agent Carr exchanged a look with her colleague. Ms. Rhodes, this goes beyond compliance failures. I know. And you're providing this voluntarily? Yes. 200 innocent employees work there. If the company collapses because of his actions, they lose everything. And after 9 years of doing the right thing, only to be fired for it, I'm done shielding people from consequences they earned. She nodded. We'll need copies. And you may be called to testify. I understand. For 4 hours they scrutinized every piece of evidence. The cryptographic seals held. The timeline was solid. No signs of manipulation. By the end, Agent Carr looked like someone who'd come for a routine checkup and found a tumor. Ms. Rhodes, this could involve other agencies. Unauthorized access to material non-public data? That falls under SEC jurisdiction. Insider trading. Corporate espionage. I took a breath. What I thought was self-protection might have uncovered something far worse. Whatever you need, I said. I just want the truth on record. She gave a small smile. You've already ensured that. We'll be in touch. Keep the files secure. Don't talk to anyone from Vanguard. Refer them to us. Driving home, the weight was gone. The evidence was in the right hands. It wasn't my fight anymore. But Joshua wasn't finished. 3 days later, a process server handed me the lawsuit. Vanguard Solutions versus Callista Rhodes. Alleging theft, unauthorized access, breach of fiduciary duty. They painted me as a disgruntled thief, targeting the very backup systems I'd preserved to save the company. I called my attorney Leslie Park. She read the complaint and laughed. Aggressive? Yes. Stupid? Absolutely. They're suing you for doing your job. right before an FTC audit where your backups are their only lifeline. This reeks of panic. So what do? We respond with everything. Show you acted within your role. We might even countersue for wrongful termination. But most importantly, we let them know you've already given the FTC everything. The lawsuit arrived 3 days later. A civil suit from Vanguard alleging theft of proprietary information and unauthorized access, painting me as a disgruntled employee out to sabotage the company. It was Joshua's counterattack. Tried to discredit me before I could expose him. My attorney, Leslie, fired back with a response that made one thing clear. I had already provided my documentation to federal investigators. Any attempt to silence me would be seen as obstruction. The message landed hard and fast. Vanguard's general counsel, Andrew Fletcher, called for a settlement meeting. Across a polished conference table at his high-end law firm, he offered to drop the suit if I returned all data, signed a strict NDA, and withdrew cooperation with the FTC. Leslie didn't blink. You're asking her to obstruct a federal investigation. That's not resolution, it's witness tampering. When the external counsel tried to pivot, I laid out my terms. Drop the lawsuit, correct my termination record to reflect I was fired for raising compliance concerns, and acknowledge my backup systems were part of my job. Fletcher bristled. That's a public admission of wrongdoing. But we both knew they were backed into a corner. As we left, Leslie grinned. They're in deep trouble. She warned me. Desperate people do stupid things. He was right. A whisper campaign started. Rumors spread by former colleagues claiming I'd stolen secrets or planned to start a competitor. Classic reputation poisoning. I didn't engage. I just documented it all. Then came a targeted hack attempt on my personal email, the same account I used to contact the FTC. Two-factor authentication stopped it, but the intent was clear. Someone wanted to see my communications with investigators. I reported it immediately and switched to encrypted channels. Meanwhile, the FTC audit began. Vanguard floundered, trying to feed auditors summary stats from Joshua's dashboard instead of real logs. It wasn't enough. When they demanded interviews, including mine, Fletcher tried to block me, citing the lawsuit. The FTC shut him down. Cooperation wasn't optional. At the formal interview, Agent Carr asked directly about my backup systems. Business continuity and regulatory compliance, I said. Standard practice in system architecture. And were they authorized? They were part of my job. Like fire extinguishers, you don't wait for a fire to justify having them. They were implicit in my role as system architect. Nobody specifically authorized them because nobody needed to. They were fundamental infrastructure, like having fire extinguishers or emergency exits. When did that change? When Joshua Riley took over digital operations. He viewed redundant systems as inefficiency rather than safety measures. He ordered several backup systems decommissioned without understanding their purpose. Did you comply with those orders? I documented the risks and recommended against decommissioning systems that supported regulatory compliance. When my recommendations were dismissed, I preserved the data that would otherwise be lost. Why? Because I knew what happened when auditors asked for documentation that didn't exist. I'd seen other companies face enforcement actions because they couldn't prove compliance. I didn't want that to happen to Vanguard. Agent Carr pulled up system logs on her screen. These records show administrative access to financial systems outside normal business hours. Can you explain this activity? That's not my activity. Those are Joshua Riley's credentials accessing databases containing vendor payment information, executive compensation data, and acquisition details. I documented it because it appeared to violate company policy regarding data access. Did you report these violations? Not formally. By the time I identified the pattern, Joshua was my direct supervisor. Reporting him would have meant going to his father, the CEO. I documented the activity and waited to see if it was legitimate business need that I didn't understand. And was it? I don't believe so. The data being accessed had no operational purpose for his role. The timing was suspicious, often correlated with company announcements or stock movements. But I can't definitively state intent from logs alone. They questioned me for 3 hours. Every detail of my documentation, every decision I'd made, every interaction with Joshua. By the end, I was exhausted but relieved. Everything I'd said was true, supported by evidence and consistent with my previous statements. As I was leaving, Agent Carr caught me in the hallway. Off the record, your documentation is the most comprehensive I've seen in 15 years of investigations. Whatever happens with Vanguard, you did everything right. Doesn't feel that way. It never does. But you'll be vindicated. Count on it. I drove home wondering what vindication would look like. My career was effectively destroyed. Even if I won the legal battle, I'd always be the woman who'd reported her employer to federal investigators. Companies don't hire people with that reputation, no matter how justified. But I'd told the truth. That had to count for something. The vindication came sooner than expected, and from a direction I hadn't anticipated. 2 weeks after my FTC interview, Agent Carr called. Ms. Rhodes, I wanted to give you advance notice. We're expanding our investigation and bringing in the Securities and Exchange Commission. Your documentation of unauthorized data access has raised significant concerns about potential insider trading. My stomach dropped. Insider trading? Joshua Riley's access to acquisition negotiation documents corresponded with unusual trading activity in his personal investment accounts. He appears to have purchased stock options in target companies shortly before acquisition announcements. The SEC is very interested in your logs showing when he accessed that information. I just documented system access. I didn't know about stock trades. You didn't need to. You provided evidence of unauthorized access to material non-public information. The SEC's forensic accountants connected the rest. This has become a securities fraud investigation, and your logs are crucial evidence. I sat down heavily. What I'd thought was just covering my ass against wrongful termination had apparently exposed a much larger crime. Joshua hadn't just been incompetent. He'd been using his system access for insider trading and destroying compliance infrastructure to cover his tracks. What happens now? The SEC will likely request your testimony under oath. Vanguard will be subject to expanded investigation. And Joshua Riley is in serious legal jeopardy. I wanted you to know before it becomes public. It became public 3 days later. The news broke during morning trading. SEC investigating Vanguard Solutions for potential securities violations. Stock price dropped 20% in an hour. By afternoon, every business publication was running stories about the CEO's son under investigation for insider trading. My phone exploded. Reporters requesting interviews. Former colleagues asking what I knew. Recruiters suddenly interested in talking. And Fletcher, Vanguard's general counsel, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails about settling the lawsuit. Leslie called, barely containing her amusement. They want to settle. Immediately. Full terms, no admission of wrongdoing from your side. Everything you asked for plus a financial component they're calling a severance package. How much? 7 figures. Plus legal fees, corrected employment records, and a mutual non-disparagement clause. They're terrified you'll talk to the media. What do you recommend? Take it. You've won. They're offering you everything you wanted plus money you weren't even asking for. And the non-disparagement clause works both ways, they can't trash you publicly either. We settled within a week. I signed documents acknowledging I'd return company equipment, which I'd already done. They signed documents acknowledging my termination was improper and related to compliance concerns I'd raised. Money transferred to my account, more than I'd earned in 2 years at Vanguard. The lawsuit disappeared. My employment record was corrected. And I was officially done with Vanguard Solutions. But the investigation continued. The SEC was meticulous, building a case from my system logs, trading records, and Joshua's own electronic communications. Turned out he'd been bragging to friends about his investment insights, not realizing those messages could be subpoenaed. 6 months after I was escorted out of the building, federal prosecutors charged Joshua Riley with multiple counts of securities fraud and insider trading. The indictment cited extensive evidence including detailed system access logs maintained by former Vanguard employee Callista Rhodes. The media loved it. Tech executive's son using privileged access for illegal trading. Whistleblower fired for raising concerns. Company destroying evidence to cover up fraud. I did one interview, carefully avoiding any non-disparagement violations, simply confirming that I'd maintained backup systems as part of my job and cooperated with federal investigators. Joshua's trial was brief. The evidence was overwhelming, the system logs irrefutable. His defense tried to argue the logs could have been fabricated, but the cryptographic verification held up under expert scrutiny. You can't fake timestamps and hash signatures, not without leaving traces detectable by forensic analysis. He was convicted on all counts. Sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, massive fines, and banned from serving as a corporate officer for life. The CEO, his father, resigned in disgrace. Vanguard's board cleaned house, bringing in new leadership committed to rebuilding the company's integrity. I got offers. Consulting firms wanting someone who understood compliance architecture. Tech companies looking for system architects with integrity. Government agencies recruiting for regulatory positions. I chose consulting. Started my own firm specializing in compliance infrastructure and data security. My first client was a mid-sized tech company concerned about audit readiness. I built them a proper backup system, documented everything, and trained their team on why redundancy isn't inefficiency. My second client was referred by the first. My third came from a presentation I gave at a compliance conference. Within a year, I had more work than I could handle alone. Hired 2 junior architects, both brilliant and both committed to doing things right rather than doing things fast. Sometimes former Vanguard employees reached out. The ones who'd survived the purge, who'd stayed during the restructuring. They'd tell me the company was better now. That new leadership actually listened to compliance concerns. That they wished I'd been there to see it. I didn't wish that. I'd spent 9 years fighting against entropy, watching incompetence destroy careful work. I'd been vindicated, compensated, and proven right in the most public way possible. But more importantly, I was free. Free from the responsibility of protecting people who wouldn't protect themselves. Free from watching disasters unfold in slow motion while being powerless to stop them. Free from carrying the weight of institutional knowledge that nobody valued until it was gone. 3 years after the settlement, I received an unexpected letter. From Joshua Riley, surprisingly. Handwritten, sent from federal prison. Ms. Rhodes, I know this doesn't change anything, but I wanted you to know I understand now what you were trying to do. I thought you were being obstinate and resistant to change. I didn't realize you were trying to save the company from my ignorance. I destroyed systems I didn't understand, dismissed warnings I should have heeded, and blamed you for problems I created. The insider trading was separate, stupid greed that I have no excuse for. But the compliance destruction was ignorance, which somehow feels worse. I cost 200 people their jobs when Vanguard downsized during restructuring. I cost my father his reputation and his company. I cost you your career, though it seems you've built something better. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just wanted you to know that someone in here finally understands what you were trying to prevent. I read it twice, then filed it away. Not forgiveness, he was right about that. But acknowledgement, which was something. Proof that even entitled incompetence could eventually learn from consequences. My firm continued growing. We specialized in what I called protective architecture, building compliance systems that couldn't be easily destroyed by the next executive who thought efficiency meant cutting corners. Redundancy by design, audit trails that preserved themselves, fail-safes that activated when someone tried to disable monitoring. I trained my team obsessively. Not just on technical skills but on documentation, on covering their asses professionally, on understanding that sometimes your job isn't to prevent disaster but to make sure you can prove you tried. Always maintain backups. I'd tell them during training sessions. Not because you don't trust your employer but because you need to trust yourself. When something goes wrong, and it will, you need evidence that you did your job correctly. Otherwise you're just another scapegoat waiting to happen. They'd nod, take notes, and probably think I was paranoid. Until they encountered their first Joshua Riley, their first executive who valued appearance over substance. Then they'd understand. 5 years after leaving Vanguard, I gave a keynote speech at a national compliance conference. The room was packed, standing room only. Apparently my story had become legend in certain circles. The system architect who'd taken down a corporate fraud scheme with nothing but backup logs and attention to detail. I stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of compliance professionals and told them the truth. I didn't set out to be a whistleblower. I didn't plan to expose fraud. I just did my job, documented my work, and refused to let incompetence erase institutional knowledge. Everything else followed from that. The lesson isn't about heroism or corporate justice. It's about professional self-preservation. In an environment where truth is disposable and accountability is optional, documentation is your only defense. Not to attack others but to protect yourself when they attack you. Build your systems with integrity. Maintain your backups religiously. Document your concerns professionally. And never, ever assume that doing the right thing will be rewarded. Sometimes it gets you fired. Sometimes it makes you enemies. Sometimes it destroys relationships and burns bridges. But it also lets you sleep at night. And when everything falls apart, when the investigations start and the lawsuits fly, you'll have something that liars and frauds never have. Proof that you told the truth. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, dozens of people wanted to talk. Share their own stories of being scapegoated, of trying to prevent disasters only to be blamed when they happened. I listened to all of them, gave advice where I could, and referred several to employment attorneys. Because here's what I'd learned. There are thousands of people in positions like mine, holding organizations together with technical knowledge and professional integrity, undervalued and overworked, watching as executives make destructive decisions from positions of authority without understanding. Most never get vindication. They get fired, their reputations damaged, their careers derailed. They don't have the documentation I had or the lucky breaks I got. They just suffer consequences for doing their jobs correctly while others prosper from doing them wrong. I couldn't save all of them. But I could teach them to protect themselves. Could show them how to build professional insurance policies through careful documentation. Could demonstrate that the quiet person maintaining backup systems might be the only thing standing between a company and total collapse. 7 years after the Vanguard disaster, my firm had 15 employees and clients across 3 continents. We'd prevented 4 major compliance failures, identified 2 fraud schemes before they metastasized, and built a reputation for being expensive, thorough, and absolutely worth it. I'd also become something I'd never expected, a mentor. Young professionals starting careers in compliance architecture would seek me out, asking how to handle difficult executives, how to document concerns without seeming insubordinate, how to build systems that couldn't be easily destroyed. I'd tell them the same thing every time. Your job is to protect the organization even from itself. Especially from itself. That means building systems that survive leadership transitions, that preserve truth when people want to rewrite history, that maintain integrity when pressure builds to compromise. It also means knowing when to walk away. If you've documented concerns, raised alarms, and been consistently ignored, you're no longer protecting the organization. You're just a potential scapegoat. That's when you make sure your evidence is secure and your next job is lined up. Never go down with a ship you weren't steering. And never let them blame you for damage they caused. Looking back, I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I hadn't maintained those backups. If I'd just done what Joshua ordered, decommissioned the redundant systems, trusted that his dashboard was adequate. The FTC audit would have exposed massive compliance gaps with no documentation of prior due diligence. The insider trading would have continued undetected. And I would have been the system architect of record when everything collapsed, my name on signature lines, my professional reputation destroyed. Instead, I'd protected myself. Quietly, methodically, without drama or confrontation. Just careful documentation and patient archiving. Building a paper trail that proved I'd tried to prevent the disaster, that showed the truth of what happened, that demonstrated my professional competence even as others questioned it. That documentation had saved my career. Had exposed fraud. Had protected 200 employees who didn't deserve to lose their jobs over executive misconduct. And had taught me the most important lesson of my professional life. In a world where people lie, data tells the truth. 10 years after being escorted out of Vanguard Solutions by security guards while co-workers whispered, I sat in my office overlooking the city and reflected on the journey. My consulting firm was thriving. My reputation was solid. And somewhere in federal records, cryptographically verified logs with my name on them had helped convict a corporate criminal. Not bad for someone who'd just been trying to do her job correctly. My phone buzzed. A potential client inquiry, a financial services company concerned about audit readiness before their IPO. I opened the email, scanned the details, and smiled. This was what I did now. Helped organizations build integrity into their infrastructure. Taught them that compliance wasn't about checking boxes but about building systems that told the truth even when people wanted to lie. I replied to the inquiry, scheduled a consultation call, and got back to work. Because somewhere out there, another Callista was sitting at her desk watching systems decay, documenting problems, and wondering if anyone would listen. I was proof that sometimes, eventually, people did listen. Not because they wanted to, but because reality has a way of demanding attention. And when it did, documentation was the difference between being vindicated and being destroyed. So I kept building those systems. Kept training people to protect themselves. Kept telling the story of how backup logs and attention to detail had exposed a fraud scheme and saved a career. Because in the end, that's what integrity looks like. Not heroic confrontation or dramatic revelation. Just quiet competence, careful documentation, and the professional courage to preserve truth even when it's inconvenient. They called it theft. I called it insurance. The courts called it evidence. And history would call it the reason Joshua Riley went to prison while Callista Rhodes built a successful consulting practice. Sometimes the quiet ones keeping careful records are the ones who change everything. Not because they want to, but because someone has to. And if you're going to be that person, you'd better have receipts. I had mine. Encrypted, time-stamped, cryptographically verified, and stored where no one could delete them. And that made all the difference.